A bit of politics now. Democrats face a growing revolt among liberal supporters mounting their own Tea Party-style challenges against establishment Democrat candidates. Maryland's 2016 Democratic state primary is becoming a case in point. Congresswoman Donna Edwards is set to challenge longtime Congressman Chris Van Hollen for the Senate seat there. Some national liberal groups rallying behind Edwards, saying Van Hollen has been too willing to compromise and is tied to Wall Street. Let's talk it over with Elizabeth Harrington, a staff writer for the Washington Free Beacon. Betsy Woodruff is a political reporter for the Daily Beast. Welcome to both of you.
Thanks.
Betsy Woodruff, to you first. This has been described as a sort of democratic, democratic battle, like a Tea Party kind of challenge in the Republican Party. Is that an apt description?
I think that's absolutely fair, and we see the roots of this going back pretty far. In fact, I asked a Democratic member that question last December when members of Congress were voting for the omnibus legislation to keep the government open. And Democrats were very opposed to that bill, or many of them were, because it included provisions that made campaign finance laws a little weaker, and it did some deregulating of Wall Street banks. I spoke with one Democratic member of Congressman Steve Cohen, and I asked him, I said, is this comparable, at least in terms of tone and strategy, to what Tea Party activists are doing? And he said, yes, I think that's a fair comparison. The reality is rank and file Democrats, both in Congress and in the grassroots, are extremely frustrated with the direction that many of their party bosses are taking the party.
So, Elizabeth, you've got Barbara Mikulski not running again for her Senate seat. The seat is open. You've got two Democrats in a very Democratic state who have announced intentions to run for that seat. Chris Van Hollen is a guy who has risen to leadership ranks in the Democratic Party there in Congress. But apparently one of the badges that taints his reputation among some in the Democratic Party is that he has been too willing to work with Republicans.
Right. So I think what we're seeing, we're used to seeing this kind of battle infighting in the Republican Party because the conservative movement is pretty diverse. You have different views on foreign policy, for instance. I think why we're seeing this now in the Democratic Party is because they haven't been very successful in the past few election cycles. Besides the presidency, they only have 188 seats in the House. They only have 18 governors throughout the country, and they only have state control of 11 legislatures. So what we're seeing is they're questioning, what's the future of our party? How can we win the working white class voters? And they're battling this out. A lot of the grassroots, the kind of Elizabeth Warren wing of the party, wants them to go further left. And that's what we're seeing in Maryland. It might work in Maryland to push further left because it's a solid blue state. But we'll see if it works in other states, because I don't think a lot of their concerns about campaign finance reform and climate change are very top priorities for the American voter.
Whoever wins this primary, Betsy, is almost certain to win the Senate seat, wouldn't you say? Or is that not a given anymore after Maryland elected a Republican governor?
The conventional wisdom is that whoever wins the Democratic Senate primary in Maryland has the Senate seat on lock. And I think that's a fairly safe view to take on this issue. However, look, Republican Larry Hogan defeated a Democrat who had massive backing from the president by 5 points in 2014. If 2016 goes south for Democrats, if things go badly, if Clinton implodes, it's certainly within the realm of possibility that Republicans could make this seat competitive. Now, it's going to be very, very difficult and expensive, but you can't rule anything out at this point.
So again, back to this Donna Edwards versus Chris Van Hollen race, Elizabeth. Donna Edwards is more out of the Elizabeth Warren school, right?
No, she certainly is. She's seen as this kind of champion for these further left positions than Chris Van Hollen is. But I think it's important to remember Chris Van Hollen is not some conservative Democrat. He's very liberal. He happens to have, 30% of the time on his bills a Republican co-sponsor. I think that kind of is upsetting to these really further left supporters who are like, that's not good enough. And the question is, okay, if Van Hollen can't win in Maryland and Maryland's going that far to the left, they'll probably be okay with Donna Edwards in Maryland. But like Betsy said, I mean, you never know. The tide has really turned against Democrats in these past few election cycles. And focusing on issues like campaign finance reform, I think, is not going to really get those voters back.
So, Elizabeth, is the Democratic Party, I mean, is this an example of the Democratic Party trying to find its soul, trying to find its core voter?
I think they are. I mean, I think you've seen this progressively get further to the left since, Bill Clinton was president. He was seen as a very kind of moderate triangulation working with Republicans in Congress. I think Hillary Clinton has always been more liberal than her husband, but now just in those a couple decades, it's really moved to the left, and they think that's the answer for them, and I think you consistently seeing them go further in that direction.
And Betsy, you, for one, are predicting a bit of a mess coming up for Democrats because of elections like this.
Absolutely. The issues that are most galvanizing to the Democratic, including Wall Street regulation and campaign finance reform, are also the most problematic to the party bosses in Washington, D.C. President Obama was working with Speaker Boehner to lobby for the Cromnibus legislation that was so challenging and so frustrating to many of the grassroots Democratic activists. So it's kind of a situation where we have an unstoppable force running into an immovable object, and it could absolutely be very, very tense for Democrats over the next few months as they get this all hashed out. If they can.
Will be a fascinating race to watch. Thank you both for joining us.